You know, they held it back for years. Bremerton or whoever they are, Bremers, wouldn't let it go. Now it's growing.
Just so I get it on tape, it's Robert Clark.
That's correct.
And C-L-A-R-K, no E.
That's correct.
And do you go by Robert or Bob or
Bob.
Bob. Did you have a nickname when you were in the service or anything?
No, this Clark. I did it in high school. I was Zeke. Zeke Jake Leg.
Where'd you grow up?
Colby, Kansas. That's in northwest corner of Kansas.
You know, the wizard said to Dorothy, "Why would anybody want to go back to Kansas?" I've been to a variety of places in Kansas and enjoyed some of it back there. So cold sometimes, but
I think most of my family's gone, except some second, third cousins from there.
How did you end up in the Navy? Did you enlist or drafted or?
There wasn't much work in Colby when I was 18, 19 years old. So I had a neighbor when I was a small child. He and his wife were going back to California. They'd bought property out there and run a motel-like place. And they wanted someone to go with them to help drive and pay the gas. So me and a longtime friend and then a farm boy, we took them up, went out to California. And my friend and I stayed with his brother in Hollywood till there were just men living in this house. And they said, "You guys get out and get a job or else." And we couldn't find a job. So I got in the Navy, and my friend had skin coming off his feet. They wouldn't take him. He had to cure that first. And they took him about 30 days later. And I never saw him again.
What year was it that you went in?
1940.
1940.
Yeah. August 1940.
It's funny, everybody remembers, most people remember the day, the date, and the time that they rose that right hand. And
August 20th, 1940.
What, did you have any idea at that time that war was coming? Or were you thinking it was a job?
In a way, yes. We pretty well knew it was. Something happened in Europe, and pretty soon we're going to be there. My uncle was a World War I fighting veteran. My dad was a World War I veteran on railroad for America in France. So yeah, we pretty well knew it was coming. I belonged to B Company.
B Company, yeah.
When I was a 19-year-old arguing the war, I belonged to B Company. I'll be here when you leave, and I'll be here when you get back.
It's a good company to belong to.
But
was it Tennessee your first? Because you were on the Tennessee, right?
Yes.
Was that your first ship you were put on, or did you end up on?
I was put aboard a destroyer for transport from San Jose to Long Beach. And then I went aboard the USS Saratoga. And there were about 2,000 travelers on that ship. Not crew. We were on there for transport. And they varied from sailors to Marines. I guess that was all, no Army. And went to Hawaii on the Saratoga. It was so big and exciting that I didn't get seasick. A lot of men did.
I always think it's funny because, I mean, Kansas, there's not a lot of seaports in Kansas.
No.
And to have this Kansas boy ending up out on a ship and tossing around in the sea.
There wasn't any rivers to speak of where I lived, either. Creeks, so that's all.
So for you, it must have been, well, A, we're coming out of the Depression, so it's a job, but it also must have been pretty exciting to...
Oh, yeah. I had seen sailors hitchhike through Colby. And I read about Shanghai and the China Fleet and that kind of stuff. So I was interested in the Navy, not the Army. And that was the first time when I got a chance to get down to the big government building in Los Angeles. That's where the recruiting station was. And someone had told me and my friend, so we knew where to go. But we didn't have any money. His brother and his friends let us live with them and fed us because we didn't have any money. Could buy cigarettes. We weren't clear out of money.
It's funny how that works. You know,
Yeah.
certain things there's always money for. You know,
Yeah.
that's like when I see a homeless person out looking for money right now, and they have a cup of Starbucks in their other hand. I'm like, wait a minute here.
Yeah.
When you arrived at Hawaii, you sailed into Pearl Harbor.
Saratoga tied up just off of Honolulu, and we went by motor launches into our ships. There was quite a few men went to the Tennessee. So I knew some guys for 6 weeks training. So I knew a few of the people who went aboard.
What was Hawaii like then?
It was a city to me, because I come from a town. And downtown where the sailors went was the usual trade for sailors, booze, broads, and whatever. And it was pretty primitive. Did you see the picture I have of the Royal Hawaiian and that other Alo Moana? Well, that was taken in 1940, and we took one when we were there the last time, in this whole new world.
It's interesting because kids today, Hawaii is a tourist destination, and you know, pretty much anybody that wants to go, you can get on Hawaiian Air and $500, you can get over there in 7 nights. And
Yep.
and Pearl Harbor is so well known now, but when you were going there, Hawaii was.
We took a boat from the ship over to a dock, and then there was buses or taxis if you had the money. You ride downtown, and if you were smart enough to remember where to get on the bus, it would take you back to the dock where your boat was going to pick you up. And you could get food besides Navy food. It wasn't all screwing around. We went to the hotel in town where they have the Hawaiian kings history. So it was something to see. And I went out to the Royal Hawaiian one time with a friend. I think we took a taxi out there, and cost so much we took a bus going home, going back to the dock. And there's an island where you could go play ball. The Navy was their island. They used it. And we used to go play baseball. And there was always beer if you wanted to drink. Some men drank and some men didn't drink at all. Just like any other part of society.
What was the beer of choice back then, do you remember?
No. I didn't know anything about beer anyway. Kansas was a dry state. When I was growing up, if I wanted anything to drink, I had to go to a bootlegger or go over to Colorado.
When you went out to play ball, were there teams from the ships, or you just...
Different crews, yeah. Then we had chosen basketball teams, guys that were good basketball players, and they went and challenged the ships all around the harbor. So they did a lot of ball playing. And rowing, they'd have races with the rowboats. That gave us some action. I never did do that. I couldn't see working that hard.
What was your choice of activity? Baseball? Was that?
I went to baseball, yeah. And I didn't care much one way or another. I just wanted to get off the ship and be with my friends.
Because the ships were almost like floating cities. I mean, you have
Yeah.
quite a few men and
in that time, the Tennessee I was a first division man, which is the front part of the ship. In that, there's two divisions up in front, one port and one starboard. And I was on the starboard side. And we slept in hammocks that were rigged up into the overhead. And when we got up in the morning and took those hammocks down and stored them in a hammock netting, they called it, then we had a wide open room for our quarters. And our tables were put down there to eat. And we could play cards and lots of stuff we did down there. With nothing else to do, you know. A lot of card players, a little gambling, stuff like that. And if we just got clear out of hand, then the bosun mate would say, "We need to scrub the deck." And he'd keep us busy for an hour.
So prior to the attack of Pearl Harbor, it sounds like a lot of what they say in the service, hurry up and wait. And
Yeah.
did you have drills or?
Yeah, there was always drills. Getting firing practice, you'd have to have man your battle stations. This is a drill, man your battle stations. They always said this is a drill. And we knew it was going to be a drill anyway. So we'd go to our battle stations, and mine, 1st and 2nd Division sailors were in turret 1 and turret 2. That's the turrets with the 14-inch guns, diameter guns, 50 feet long, big guns. And I worked my way in that area. I didn't want to be a deck sailor, so I worked up to a gunner's mate, which gave me working station in the turret.
So you were where,
Number 1 turret.
and that was towards the bow?
That was in the bow. Yeah, right up in the front part of the bow was the restrooms, bath, shower area. So it was handy besides.
Well, to me, I think it would be handy because I would have had something scared out of me that I would have needed to bend to.
You needed those places.
When you, just to give a person a perspective, when you stood up on the deck of your ship and looked around, tell me about some of the ships that are around you and what it looks like, how close things are. Are you tied up side to side with ships or anchored apart from each other? Or?
Well, the weekend of Pearl Harbor, that week and the month before when we came back to Pearl Harbor, Ford Island was in the middle of the bay, the water, and there were concrete docks there made to tie up the ships. So there was a big dock up here and a big dock here, fore and aft. And we'd move the ship in, tugboats would push us in, and we'd tie up to those concrete anchors, what they were, docks. And on the 8th, the 7th, the West Virginia was tied up outboard of us, away from the island. And the Oklahoma was up in front of us. And there was another ship, I think it was the California or Maryland was tied up with the Oklahoma. And the Arizona was directly behind us. And there were ships tied up to her, or near her anyway. So we were pretty snug, which was a blessing for the Tennessee, because the West Virginia took the torpedoes, and both of the Arizona and the Oklahoma took bombs. We got a couple of bombs, but nothing like those that were exposed on the outside.
So you were protected.
We were really protected. Oklahoma sank, turned over. A guy from my hometown school was aboard the Oklahoma. I think he died. Pretty sure he died.
Where were you? Take me through as much of that day as you want to and can. Where were you? What happened?
Well, it was Sunday, so there's no work. It's a non-work day. And I was inside the turret. There's a place called the shell deck, and it had a bench on one of the bulkheads. And I was laying on the bench reading a book, 7 o'clock in the morning, just finished breakfast. And went up there to get out of the road because there still were people who had to clean up the food tables and stuff like that, and the decks. So I was up there reading the book, and here come the alarm. I heard the bombs, and it wasn't any doubt when they said, "Man your battle stations, this is not a drill." Yeah, I knew that. Well, our crew then, there's something in the order of 100 men on that turret. So they come streaming in as fast as they could. And my station was on one of the guns as I put the primer in. When they opened the breech, loaded the powder in, closed the breech, they had to have a primer to fire the powder. And I put the primer in the powder, in the breech, and checked that it locked. When the gunners threw it home, threw it closed, I'd hit the handle, make sure the handle went in there and locked, and laid down underneath the gun. That wasn't exactly fun either, because when it fired, it went right over me. Well, we all manned our battle stations, which is what they said, and waited for orders. And we got orders. Blake, Lieutenant Blake, I think, was my senior officer. And Schertz was the junior officer. Schertz was a lawyer from New York. Never forget him. Blake was a Texas boy still had a southern accent, but he's a full lieutenant, so he'd been in the Navy a while. And he would call, "I need 6 men to do something. Get out of the turret, go do it." And one of the jobs was to throw the cables that tied the West Virginia to the Tennessee, throw them off the big bits where they, you know what a bit is? It's a big steel bollard, about this big around, and it's to tie up with. It's to secure the ship. So we had to go throw those cables off, and they were steel cables, probably 1.5-inch cables, heavy as the dickens. And as we were throwing them off, there came the word to clear the weather deck. Planes coming in, clear the weather deck. I didn't hear it. I was struggling with one of those big loops around the bit. And when I felt the weight of the cable come down in my arms, I looked around, everybody else had all gotten out of there. And then I realized what had happened and run for the cover of the turret. You could crawl underneath the overhang on the turret. That was one thing we did. And the West Virginia was sinking, and it tied up to us. It tended to pull us over, lean over a little bit. So we needed to get them undone. How we managed that, I haven't the faintest notion. Somebody had to loosen them up over on the West Virginia, so we could get the loops off, the big loops off the bits. But we did. And next time I was called out to go get fire hoses on I believe it was the second deck, and bring them to the top side because the oil from the Arizona was flowing up between the West Virginia and the Tennessee. And we needed a fire hose to squirt in there to push it back. Well, I went with a Marine, and we found the hose down there, fire hose, grabbed the end, pulled it off of the hanger, and went running for the stairway to go up top, ladder way. And apparently we just broke the end off of the female end, where it was tied up to the pipe. When they got up on top side, they couldn't put water through the hose. And there was an old boatswain's, and he was an old man, probably 35, 40. But compared to the rest of it, he's an older guy. And he was doing the directing. And he chewed us out something fierce. But just then, the officer who was senior aboard ship at the time got the engines going so that and put them in gear so they were trying to drive the ship forward. It drove the water backwards because we couldn't go forward. We were tied up. We couldn't. And it drove the oil and the fire away from the Tennessee and the West Virginia. Then, Joe got back inside, got called out to take the tarps. Tarps were on fire. The tarps were shelter, shade. When we come in the harbor, we'd put up the tarp and give us shade on the weather deck. And an aircraft gun on the deck above would kick its shells out and fall down on the tarp, and they were hot, and it started to fire. So we went up and untied those and threw them in the water. Other than that, I went down inside the ship. And if I had a message to do, I don't remember that. But I do remember being down there with two men's bodies on the deck, covered over with some tarp. And what happened then? Oh, it was a long, every wait was a long wait between somebody telling you what to do. And finally, they said we could come out on the weather deck, and we could come out and look around and watch for planes coming in. Oh, I know one thing we did. Those 14-inch guns, when you had a practice, you had a dummy shell and dummy bags of powder. So you'd ram the shell in, drop the bags down and ram them in, and that was to get your timing down right, Load the gun, close the breech. Well, in order to get those dummy shells out of there, we had a big lead dealy bob, almost big as a gun barrel, and probably so long. We'd pull it on a rope up to the end of the gun, and then elevate the gun and let her go. And it'd come sliding down there and hit the dummy shell. Well, those were still in the gun, and we had to go out there and pull them out, and we just took all the rope and started, 6 or 8 of us started running, pulled them right out and honk down on the deck, and they stayed until we had a day or two of cleanup,
How did they get the orders to you? I mean, was it, are they?
Broadcast.
So
We had speakers.
And do you remember how loud, was it loud and confused? Because you had all these ships and speakers and.
No, I don't recall any confusion in what I heard. I understood what I heard. If I was inside the turret, then it was the officer was inside with the speaking system for the turret, and he could talk to us. If it was from the officer in charge of the ship, then it went all over the ship, down inside the decks and up on the top side. So I didn't have any trouble with that understanding. And there was a lot of smoke. Even by noon, it was still, Pearl Harbor was covered with smoke. And we'd go up and watch for planes, of course. And every once in a while there'd be an alarm. Here comes a flight of planes. And it wouldn't be so. It'd be our planes, or it wouldn't be an attack. But you didn't know, so you got yourself down inside the ship. By late in the day, fairly late in the day, they were calling for people to go out in the motor launches to pick up bodies that were in the water. And we had to launch out there. Oliver Hardy was the coxswain. And he had been doing that all because he's away from the ship first thing in the morning. He was doing that without any orders. And they couldn't get anyone to volunteer. So finally the boatswain's mate in our division said to one sailor, "Hey, you used to work in a funeral parlor. Won't be anything to you. You go. You go with that car with the coxswain." No way he wouldn't go. So boatswain's mate was, one of them was Knucklehead, and I think he's the one that sent another guy, and the other guy's name was Butterball. I called him Butterball. He's short and rotund. And believe it or not, I saw Butterball over in Honolulu this last December. Same Butterball. But he just went, nothing to him. And when he came back in, I happened to be there when he got aboard ship. Time to eat. And we were eating on the run. It wasn't like we were served a meal. So he said, "Oh, I got to go wash up." He had oil on his hands, for one thing. And the boatswain's mate said, "Budball, get your butt up there and get cleaned up. Time to eat." So Butterball started that way, and another guy said, "There's no water up there. We don't have any bath water, so you're wasting your time using the fresh water to wash the inside of the hull where the heat had burned the paint off back in the officers' quarters, and it wasn't livable back there that way. So the sailors were sending back every buckets of water, scrub the walls down." And Butter says, "Oh, I don't care." Wiped his hand on his pants and got a plate, got a tray. Yeah, same old Butterball. And Oliver Hardy, I can't remember why they called him Oliver. There was a reason. He kept that boat in water for most of the day, going all around. I don't even remember what happened at night. I know we didn't leave our quarters, general quarters. We manned the guns all night. So we just slept on the deck. We didn't take our hammocks, anything like that. We just lived through the night. But then things got better organized. For one thing, the captain was gone. He was ashore when that started. So there was a junior, wasn't very much junior, but he's probably a full commander, who was in charge of the ship. And when the captain came back, then the orders changed, of course, to the way he saw things, which is what it's supposed to be. But I thought that junior officer did a good job. He kept us busy. The next day, they'd started deciding how we're going to get out of there. The Oklahoma had turned over in front of us. I think it was the Maryland was on the Ford Island side of that, and it was able to get underway. But we couldn't because West Virginia had us pressed up against these keys. So they got crews out there and started shoveling the sand out of the concrete keys. And the reason was to get down inside it far enough to put dynamite in there to blow up the keys, and far enough down it'd be away from thicker and be away from the ship's side. And they did. They set off, 3 charges seemed to me like, of dynamite. Blew that up and then moved it out of the way over the next 2 or 3 days. And the Tennessee was able to get underway. And it was pretty spooky because we had heard about the midget submarines, being outside the harbor and inside the harbor. And as we went out the mouth of Pearl Harbor, I'm pretty sure there were 3 ships went out, plus the destroyers. Destroyers went out ahead, and they bit depth charges. So we'd be going along, kaboom, and kaboom, scared the crap out of most of us. But that was to prevent any surprise. And we got to sea, and it was a long, 5 days journey back to Bremerton.
It sounds like from what you described that Pearl Harbor just became this bed of oil.
A lot of
fire.
Yes. They finally got the fire out, and I think I was off of the top side when the fire went out. All the fires went out. Because they'd burn here, and then they'd burn here. It wasn't a steady fire. You could see the oil. Yeah, the oil was pretty terrible when we went out of the harbor.
I've seen film footage, but of course there's not smell with it. When you think of that, do you connect the smell with the burning, or?
I never had that. I don't remember those feelings at all. I saw it, but I don't remember the tension, the smell. I remember the noise. Noise is pretty bad sometimes. Everybody starts shooting, If one guy shot, everybody shot, whether there's anything there or not. And that probably is a reasonable way of doing things.
What's it like when you fire the big guns where does that throw your ship around?
Yes. We didn't use them against aircraft, of course. But when the week or month before we'd come back to Pearl Harbor, we'd been through a gunnery practice. And that's something that I need to tell you. They had another ship pulling the target we fired at, and had airplanes pulling anti-aircraft targets that they fired at. And when our 1 and 2 had fired, then we were free. The officers told us we could come up on deck, and when 1 was done, come up on deck and watch 2 fire. So we got back on the quarterdeck in the back part of the ship, and they brought that sucker around sideways, the ship's going this way and they're out here, and fire, and you can see the bullets. And they were going, and they seemed to all come in and bump that. And it took me 40 years to realize that was my eyes adjusting. But it sure did rock that boat. It would just go sideways, 100 feet, push it sideways. I would guess 100 feet. Just one turret, 3 guns. So what would happen if they all fired at once? And they did. But when we went back to port Saturday night, Friday or Saturday, we had a whole fleet out to sea. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, battle fleet. And all of a sudden, the aircraft carriers and the destroyers took off. The battle fleet with their destroyers went back to Pearl Harbor. And as a sailor, I didn't have any idea why. But the reason was they saw the submarine, unaccountable submarine. We went back to port, tied up the ship, put the awnings up, got secure for being in the harbor. And next morning, which I'm sure was Saturday morning, we held a cruise get-together on the weather deck to tell us, for the captain to address us about the firing practice. And Every battery got an E except number 3 turret. An E for excellence. And he said, I'll have to tell you later. Can you take a break?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, we're back on.
We're back on. Let's see, we had just gotten ready to go back out of the harbor, went out of the harbor.
How damaged was your ship?
There was a bomb hit on number 2 turret center gun, and it knocked a chunk of steel out of there. I don't know how big, but about the size of a football maybe. And part of that came right down and hit the ventilator at the edge of number 1 turret. And when we went in under to get into the turret, you had to get down, crawl, and you took a hold of that ventilator to get down to get to the hatch underneath the turret. And that's where that steel hit. Number 3 turret took a direct hit on top of the turret. It was the one that didn't get the E. And one of the men that I knew well enough to visit with, he was killed in that turret. I don't know, other than him, I didn't know anybody else who was killed. I know there were, but only 2 or 3 people. A friend of mine, he's in that book back there, was a mess cook at the time. And out there, when you're a mess cook, you wear shorts and a t-shirt. That's your uniform. And an apron. And I saw him sometime after we were allowed to come out of the turret. And he said, asked each other how we're doing, all that kind of stuff. And, I'm pretty good, he says. But I was scared to death until I went down and put on jeans. It all went away. Covered up my body. Strange. One of our chiefs, I'm pretty sure he was a gunner's mate, but I'm not positive. When the ship was going out of Pearl Harbor and the depth charges were going off, had been going off. This is after we got far enough out. He wouldn't stay in chief's quarters, which is up in the bow of the ship, below our deck. He wouldn't stay in there. He wouldn't sleep in there at night. It just scared him silly, for some reason. Of course, everybody's scared silly, but he wouldn't, in no way would he stay in that chief's quarters. What do you want to know from now on?
Do you remember, because you talk about being scared silly, that's what, again, Bill Fort, the gentleman we talked to on Kashmir, he says, I want to tell you they weren't scared, they're lying to you. And he says he had to go change his shorts, but...
I didn't have to do that.
Do you remember, after the attack and things started to settle down, did it become life as normal real quick, or what did you talk about? Was there constant fear, or?
I think most of us lost the fear. As long as our ship was viable, I think we were just normal then, fairly normal. Excited, you bet, because we didn't know what might be outside the harbor when we went outside the harbor. But I think most of us lost the fear. It tends to tie you up a little bit. But when they said need 6 guys to go out and do something, 6 guys got up. It didn't have to be George, Bob, and Henry. People was red.
Do you think that's from training or instinct?
Well, you're trained to obey. So that's part of it, yes. But you want to survive too. So you do what you could to help survive. I don't really, well, I wasn't thinking about those kind of feelings at the time, you know. But I was scared, you bet I was scared. But they said do it, so we did it.
I hear you when you describe your gunnery team, or you're the primer, somebody's loading the sack, and somebody's, I mean, it just sounds like this team, this group of people that.
That's right where you go when you man the turret. You go to your job. Yep.
Was it the same people in the turret with you all the time? I mean, was that kind of the group that you knew?
Yeah, turret 1 was manned by Division 1 sailors. We all went to the turret.
Do you see those guys at the reunion, or a lot of those?
I have in the past, but I don't. Butterball's the only one I saw that I remembered. And there may have been other men, you know, if they came over with friends or something, they tend to stick together. And if you didn't go to looking for somebody from the Tennessee, how the heck would you know? See it on his hat, that's about all.
So when you left Pearl Harbor, then you were headed to
Bremerton. The Navy Yard, we had to get the guns fixed. Turret 3 had to be fixed. I presume there was some damage in the deck from the plane shooting. But it wouldn't be very severe because there was 3-inch teak wood on the weather deck. It wouldn't have been bad enough they had to fix it. But they did have to change the guns. And they did that. Excuse me, change the turrets. Number 3 turret had to be rebuilt. And our turret didn't have any damage, just where that one gun had been hit. And that was number 2 turret, so very little damage to us.
How long did it take you to get from Bremerton, or from Pearl Harbor to Bremerton?
I think it was 5 days, but I'm guessing. I know I was at sea at Christmas time. So from the 7th to sometime to get out of the harbor. And then maybe it took longer because we may have taken a zigzag course, you know.
Do you remember if they were running hard, or were they?
I didn't have anything to do with the engines. Only time I'd know is if the bow went under and the water washed our deck. I knew that every once in a while.
So you were out at sea for Christmas.
Yeah.
Christmas on the ship. What was that like?
Pretty quiet that Christmas. Usually we had a good time. There's a lot of stuff that was available to eat and horse around with. People got gifts ahead of time. But this time I don't even remember what it was like. Not having been a very big fan of Christmas, it didn't bother me one way or another. Some of the fellows suffered from that.
A lot of homesick.
Yeah.
Do you remember what guys talked about? Just if you were sitting around having a smoke or whatever, they talk about home or sports or.
The guy I'm mentioning, Red, I like to go with him. We'd go get coffee and stand on the weather deck for hours. He'd tell me about living in Alabama. I was just fascinated. He come from an Alabama family. He come from an abusive father. His sister did something that didn't suit the family, and father beat up on Red. Because he's the one logically would have done it, you know. So he didn't even ask, he just gave him a beating. Until he left home as a kid. And he went to stay with a relative somewhere away from Alabama. Birmingham, Alabama. But he was a fascinating storyteller. To me, anyway. We were in Los Angeles. Brand new, before the war started. Brand new sailors. We went into a restaurant downtown Los Angeles. And there was a bar, you know, just like a drinking bar. And we sat down in a couple seats, and the bar ran down here and turned. And down on the end was a black man. And Red saw him, said, "Come on, let's go." And we went outside, and I said, "What the heck's the matter with you?" He said, "I'm not going to eat anywhere there's a nigger." And he felt that, and you know what he did on board ship? He'd go visit with those guys that were mess people for the officers. That's who he'd go talk. When he got homesick, he'd go talk with them. Just amazed the hell out of me. But he got over that. He was a different man the last few times I saw him.
Was he the one that ended up in Bremerton with you when you?
He was the guy, after I got married, said, "I'm signing up for long distance and hazardous duty. Why don't you sign up? Go with me." All right, I knew my ship wouldn't be there long, so I wasn't going to be with Betty long, so I might as well take the excitement of the long distance and hazardous duty, being 21 years old. And they wouldn't take him. He's only 20. It took me because I was 21. And he left the Tennessee, went to a destroyer escort, and was killed in the Philippines. And I knew that because he had gotten married. He married a woman from San Francisco, a bar woman, tougher than nails, and really a handsome woman, and older than he was. So she could tell him what to do. But they got along pretty well, what little I was around them. And for some way, I got a hold of her after the war, and Betty and I was living in Oklahoma, where there was a Navy discharge center. We were discharging Central United States sailors. And I got a hold of her some way, and she told me she was on her way to Alabama to see Red's family. Last I ever heard. Interesting. I would guess that he had the $10,000 life insurance that most people had, and that went to her, and she was going to do something with his family as the need. She saw the need. I don't know that, but she went back, apparently. She was one tough broad. Don't think she wasn't. Oh. He said they went to a big fancy restaurant in San Francisco, and the waiter come and took their order and brought it. When she took a bite of hers, it wasn't hot, wasn't warm. So she called him and said, "Hey, this is not warm. Go back and get me a new ration." So he went out and come back, and she took a bite and just went, wiped it out in the middle of the floor. They got up and walked out. He said, "I didn't know what the heck was going to happen to me." Bunch of good sailors.
What was Bremerton like when you came steaming in there?
Bremerton was a Navy town because the yard had been there for years. And there was a entertainment place for sailors. Craven Center, I believe is what they named it, name of it. And they had dances and meals, special food and stuff like that. And that's where we run into Betty. We'd go down there at night to dance and see the girls. There was Betty and her sister. So, saw the girls and eventually took one home with me.
Do you remember how you met her? Because I assume there were a lot of women there. And
Yeah. Eddie and I were sitting at a table, and there were these two girls sitting over here. And he went over and asked one of them to dance. I wasn't much of a dancer. And he danced with Betty, and pretty soon he came back to the table and said, you ought to go get a dance. So I guess I danced with her. Anyway, we got together, so we were talking together. And Eddie made arrangements to meet her 2 days, because we had to stay aboard ship one day. And we met her again, and this time I danced with her. And when we took her home, and her sister wasn't with her this time, the two of us took her home. Her dad was not very happy, having been a sailor himself in World War I. But he didn't kill us. And he said to her, it's bad enough to be coming home with one sailor, let alone two sailors. And I don't know what happened from then on. I kept going up to her house. And it was wartime, and there was no housing. All these people come in to work in the Navy Yard and construction, building temporary housing type stuff. And her father and family came to Bremerton from Missouri because she had an Uncle Bill there, and they all moved into the same little house. And then next door was Uncle Red and Jim. So it was a Wagner community right there. And I would come up to get her, and if I remember rightly, you can correct me on this, Betty, if you want to. I think I had to go in the house. Anytime I came there, I had to go in the house. And we just started dating. We didn't have a car, so if we wanted to do anything, we'd walk from the house downtown, down to this town. There's two towns, Cal something. Go down there and drink a chocolate malt, big time. And we'd hold hands a little. You'd be out for 2 hours, and we'd go walking and looking at the stores, talking. But we pretty well stuck to home when it come time for Betty to be home. She was home, and of course I had to go on into the Navy Yard, and the Navy Yard was right around the corner from probably 4 blocks or 5 blocks at the most. So it was a snap.
do you remember any of the? Did you ever go back to the dance club then, or once you started dating, you went kind of other places away from the?
I don't remember that we did. We probably did at least once. I wasn't much of a dancer. Didn't care much for that. And I've got a girl. Why would I go back to dance? And Betty was nobody's dummy, even if she was pretty young.
And now you are about, 19 now, 20 at this point?
I was 22.
You were an old man compared to a lot of the sailors.
Yeah.
That were enlisting.
Yeah, I enlisted in 40, so I was 20. And this was 2 years later. I believe I was 22.
So how long were you in Bremerton then?
Well, this was our second time back to Bremerton.
Oh.
We had repaired the ship, and there was a call for the battle fleet to go to the Battle of the Coral Sea, way down south. So we took off from Bremerton. The ship was repaired, and went down to the Coral Sea area. I never did see any battle because it was almost all airplanes. And we went back to San Francisco. We were gone at sea for 29 days. I'm pretty sure it's 29 days. Back to San Francisco, refurbished the ship, the food. I helped carry food from the freezers, and we were getting pretty damn low. And when we got the ship reloaded, there come the Battle of Midway. And the battle fleet went out from San Francisco up towards Alaska. And it got cold and dank. Everything fogged over. And the battleships had two little scout planes. And it had a launching ramp that used some kind of a propellant that shoot them off. And they sent them out to scout, and couldn't use the radio against the law, against the rules. Never did see them. Never, and we were told to come up on deck and keep an eye open to find them. Never did see them again. And then when that was over, we went back to Bremerton because they were going to put double bottoms on the Tennessee. And double bottoms meant that they were putting another sheet of steel out here 4 feet, roughly 4 feet from the side of the ship, down somewhere where if a torpedo hit it, it would explode outside of the ship instead of inside of the ship. And that was a long job. Took us off the ship, put us in barracks, so we were bored out of our minds. There wasn't anything for us to do aboard ship except we'd stand watches, the yard workmen working in there. And so I didn't miss anything. When I left, the ship was in dry dock, being repaired. The only thing I missed was going away from Betty. And we got married on November the 11th, and I left on the train on December the 31st. That's not very long. And went to Washington, D.C.
So how long had you known her before you got engaged?
From August to November.
Now, did her dad like you by now? Or
Well, we stayed away from him. When we got married, Eddie went with us and her sister. They stood up with us with the preacher. And her dad was always nice to me. He was never rude or tough or anything. Good guy. But I went to Washington, D.C. alone into a strange situation. I was just put into a dormitory barracks for sailors who were on assignment but hadn't been assigned. And that was I can't remember the name of that station in Washington, across the river from the capital. But I sat in there for a week or two, just waiting. There wasn't anything for me to do. I had to go pick up cigarette butts or something like that. Some guy'd come in to tell me. I was a gunner's mate second class by then. And then one day I got an order to report to the Office of Naval Intelligence it's not the Pentagon, it was somewhere downtown. How in the heck I got there, I have no idea. I must have taken a cab. Because I was rich then, I was making money. Got married, I got $37.50 marriage and quarters allowance. Plus $57 for being a second class gunner's mate. But I got over there, and they told me to go into Washington, D.C., find a room, place to stay, and report back to that office every morning. So I did that I found a room in Georgetown, and it was a room that there was a fire chief and his wife lived there, and they rented their spare rooms to transients like me. There was a couple of women there and me, and I think there were 2 men. And it was within walking distance of the Naval Office of Intelligence. So I could walk over there. And I'd go in, and we'd just sit around. I suppose the officer talked to us. And one day, a senior officer, and I don't remember whether he was a captain or an admiral or what, but he had a lot of gold. He got me in the office and began to talk to me about what would I do if. And they're talking about fighting strangers on the ground, not on the sea. And they uncovered the table, was covered with guns, all kinds of handguns. And there was a notice on that table, in amongst those guns. They were guns that had been picked up by the Chicago Police Department and given to the Navy. All kinds of 45s, 22s, 38s, handguns, you know. God, I thought that was fantastic. I never had seen those kind of guns. And they asked me what I'd do and how I'd perform and this kind of stuff. And apparently I was scared enough they thought, well, he's going to be all right. And after another 2 or 3 days, they told me to get a civilian suit and go down to such and such a street corner, and wait there. Don't bring anything with you except your toothbrush, that kind of stuff. And there'll be an army car come by with an army man in it, and he will stop and you give him a secret signal. What do you call those? I forget now. Password. Give him a password, and here it is. And you go with him. He's going to take you to a training camp. That's all I knew. So I bought the damn suit. I'm standing on the corner, and I looked, seeing who's going to shoot me next. There's another guy standing down there on the corner, 50 yards from me, 50 feet. And he was a twitching and a turning the same way I was. And here come a army vehicle with 2 or 3 men in it. The driver leaned out the door and went in and said, "Hey, you guys, you going with me? You supposed to go with me?" Password, my eye. That was naval intelligence. And he took us down to a camp in Virginia somewhere where they trained us in the use of the small arms, explosives, mortars, 61 mortar, 61 millimeter, and 80, I think it was. 2 different mortars. And we used them to blow up a house. The group I was with blew up a house out there in that woods. And then we hit it with the mortars, and then we went in and put dynamite and TNT charges in it. It taught us hand-to-hand combat. Had a guy from Norway was doing that. Norwegian.
I need to switch a tape here real quick.